Welcome to Mixed Vibes, where we take a deeper look at all things holistic and healing. Before we start, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Welcome to Mixed Vibes. I'm Maurice Carroll.
And I'm Janice B.
And in today's episode, we're going to talk about religion and spirituality, especially how it correlates to holistic wellness and energy work. Before we do that, we're going to do what we normally do and talk about the crystal of the day.
All right. The crystal of the day is celestite or celestite, however you would like to say it.
Yeah, I was going to say it again.
Celestite or celestite, depending on who you ask. This crystal is like a powder blue color. So they call it the lullaby stone. And we know blue resonates with throat chakra. So all blue stones kind of work with that. But this is a really high vibrational stone that brings a restored sense of trust in the infinite wisdom of the universe. The overall feeling is peace and comfort, and it stimulates and supports the throat, third eye, and crown. So the whole upper three, the upper trinity. Speaking of religion and spirituality, the whole upper three chakras at the top. It also makes it an excellent stone for overall spiritual detox, and it's a reminder that our angels are always with us, bringing us messages of love from the heavens. It's really, celestite, celestial, means heavenly, of course, and it just brings an overall comfort, like your angels are surrounding you, your heavenly entities are surrounding you.
And blue for the clouds in the sky.
It's very cloudy and lullaby and sweet and soft and peaceful. So it's a comforting stone, really.
Right.
But it definitely associates with the heavens. And it's a perfect stone.
Stone.
Usher in the conversation
about
today's topic, which is religion and spirituality. This is a big topic. This is something that we deal with on the regular.
Right.
I know I do. I know all of my students say the same thing. Anybody who practices Reiki, if you work with crystals or use any other spiritual holistic tools, we've usually received questions or pushback, right?
Mostly pushback.
Concern for our eternal souls from the religious community about what we do.
Right.
And, where do we begin? It's a gigantic topic. There's so many things we can cover. We're going to touch on it today, but I think, Maurice, you should probably start. This is your wheelhouse. That's a new term now. It's your wheelhouse.
It is.
You have firsthand experience working in the church environment, so I know you've got it firsthand.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
So I think it'd probably be important to talk about my background first, so that because I don't like when people talk about subjects and you don't know whether they actually experienced it, and they talk about it from the outside perspective and assumptions and things like that. So I was raised in church, born and raised in as a Baptist that branched out into some of the other denominations that like holiness and all of these other denominations. I was raised that way, but I was also employed in the church as a church musician. Okay. And so with that, it allowed me to go into a lot of the different denominations, and for me to experience the similarities between the denominations and what some of the differences were, what people believe, what they didn't believe, and finding out little things like some denominations don't like other denominations. It was really very interesting. And what I ended up doing throughout my experience, I was a person that. Well, I'm a person that asks a lot of questions because I want to know. I love knowing something. So
they don't like that.
And so me asking a lot of questions, it pushed me into a place where some of my colleagues and friends that had degrees and things like that, theology degrees, they didn't want to answer my questions or didn't know how to answer my questions or kind of deflected. And it was kind of frustrating for me, and because I didn't know where else to get the answers. That led me to reading and searching the internet for, different solutions and getting answers to my questions. And ultimately, it led me away from, practicing Christianity in that perspective. So I do think that there are some good things about religion. I think there are some good practices that are in it. However, the core of it is something that I couldn't, once I started getting my answers, I just couldn't subscribe to it anymore.
Right.
So, you've had a little bit of experiences yourself, as I recall.
With Christianity?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I was raised to believe in God. Let me just say that my dad was Methodist and my mom was Welsh Baptist.
Okay.
I laughed when you said Baptist.
Right.
A question mark, because there's Baptist. And same thing with Methodist. There's all kinds of different types of churches
Right.
around that belief, right?
Right.
Around that dogma. And I didn't really go to a church until elementary school. So when my parents moved to this area, because Welsh Baptist Church is in Frostburg, Maryland, and my grandfather helped build the walls around it. So they were right next door to a church where my mom grew up. So they went there. I was baptized there, but I never went there for a service. They were married there.
Okay.
That was their family church. But when they moved to D.C., he's a police officer. They're not really going to church every Sunday. You know how it is. I learned about God and praying and Jesus and stuff like that, but we didn't go to church while I was growing up. Elementary school, I want to say maybe third grade. One of my best friends, her parents were best friends with my parents, and they went to the local United Methodist Church. So I actually joined the church where my parents did. I was confirmed and went through all that. I know all that stuff. And then they started going too, and they were active in the church. So technically, I would say I was raised Methodist, right?
Okay.
Christianity, Methodist. But the same kind of thing. I think you grow up, you're believing what you're told to believe. You're not questioning anything. When you're little, you're, given these pictures of Jesus who couldn't possibly look like that, and you're told stories, and you're supposed to believe them. And I think the church community itself is awesome. When my mom and dad passed, they stepped up and helped with everything. I really could not have done all the things that I did in the time that I did it without their help. And I think that's what church is supposed to be about, is community and supporting each other under an umbrella of worship and being kind and practicing God's word. But I think because in general we know religion is organized business of spirituality.
Right.
So there's money involved, there's politics involved, there's out and out lies involved, just like politics. And so, I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly of church in general. Not that particular church, but just Christianity in general. I think that having a foundation of some type of spiritual faith is great. And for some people, it's very it's essential in their grounding and being at peace. But it can also be exclusionary. It can also be, us and them. If you don't practice like we do, if you don't dress like we do, if you don't follow these rules, you're not going to the same heaven we are. You're not going to heaven at all. And that's where I kind of am like,
And so there's similarities with all of that in all of the religions that I've studied. And just a little bit more on my background. Not only was I raised in it, but I was I love saying this, and it's not to be offensive to, because this is what I called myself, super Christian. And
uber Christian. Yeah.
And I say that because I was so really, really deeply Christian enough where I studied the other religions so that I could point out the flaws in their religion. So I really had to get to know it. Speaking with the Islamic community, having really good debates. It wasn't anything malicious because we both felt that we were in positions that we could have, these type of conversations. But just to know, about the Abrahamic religions, and I looked into a little bit of Taoism and a lot of the other religions, just so that I could see and have some type of background. So when I'm saying, oh, I'm a Christian, I had a lot of information to stand behind to say, well, you believe this, and that's not right because this is, and it put me in a position where, and I'm kind of glad that I did that, because it let me see a lot of the common threads between all of the religions, and which again, that kind of led me down my path of asking questions. And let's fast forward a little bit to, how I got to this point and being able to speak about religion and spirituality in a non-aggressive, non-attacking way. 'Cause,
Non-confrontational.
yeah. I noticed that things like meditation and crystals and Reiki and healing touch and all of these different modalities were inside of all of these religions. I didn't know those terms at the time,
Right.
but I saw the commonalities. And then you introduced me to Reiki and what it was. And, I did some studying into vibrations and frequencies before that. So, I went down a whole path of questioning
hole.
and understanding. So, we touched on part of this already, but one of the things with religion that I found very confining and what made me feel attacked within the religion is that not being able to ask questions. They weren't really welcoming the questions that you had. And it's generally, you can ask some things about the religions like, well, how do I pray? Or how do I study this? But if you say, well, if you ask a logical, historical
How is
question.
it possible that this happened?
When you say that, then that's when you start getting the pushback.
Right.
And I remember.
That's because they don't have an answer.
I remember
That's why.
one of the first questions that I asked, I always read in Genesis where it's two creation stories. And I never understood, how is this possible? You always told, Adam, his rib made Eve, but before that, you can read in Genesis as well, and it talks about that God made a man and woman, and so they were made at the same time. And then later on, you read that Adam was here first, and it was not good for him to be alone. And then the whole story of Adam and Eve. So one of the first questions that I had was, well, how? Like, it started with asking interpretation questions. And when you have those interpretation questions, it leads you down a path. That path takes you to a historic place. And of course, we know a lot of the things can't be proven historically outside of, the religion itself. So asking questions was frowned upon in religion, but it was welcomed in spiritual practices.
Right.
And that made it, it made it something very welcoming for me and to me. And then, so moving from that, I didn't like the judgmental stigmas that religion puts on things that didn't agree with what they taught. I understand, having rules and regulations, but not being able to at least understand what the other side is saying or teaching, I felt that was very constricted and restrictive,
Yeah.
and it was like, whoa, why can't I learn about it? And so, as we know, we have those conversations where people are, I don't want to say attacking, but confrontational, that's the word I want, about saying, well, you're practicing witchcraft. You're practicing voodoo and hoodoo and devil worship, because that stuff is, I don't want to mess with that. And they don't know enough information, about these different things. And I know I just ran down, I need some help, because I ran down a lot of terms. So,
Well,
let's talk about like what they are.
But let's talk about the fact also that we know there are people who take the Bible and it is actually whatever the Bible says is
Literal.
word. That's it. Not taking into consideration it's been translated. It's been translated with an agenda. So the people who I'm not going to get into the big history. We're not here for the history of the Bible.
Right.
Google it. Okay, Google it. But seriously, it was not written in English.
Google
King
James.
It has, yes, Google King James.
Yes.
And the books that he has written
Right.
and translated, not just the Bible.
Right.
Correct.
Let's go.
So, but I'm saying you can't take a book that has been translated over and over and over again from different languages and hold it accountable for judgment on everyone, because the person reading it is putting their values into it. The person who is instructing people is putting their value. We know very well that a racist person can pick up a book and say, Jesus was white, here's what it says. His hair was golden. A black person can pick it up and say his hair was woolen, right? Or the bronze and woolen. So it's how you interpret it. And you can pick up this book and say that women are below men, and you can make all kinds of rules around it, just like anything else. So if your only basis of practice is around a book that's been translated over and over again with an agenda behind it, that's where I kind of fall off the wagon with it. I feel like you said, the basis of most religious practices are the same.
Right.
There's a God, a deity, a power that is omnipotent or all good, or that is a higher power, a higher vibration than everyone else.
Right.
And you are aspiring to do that work, or to be in that light, or whatever you want to call it. But I think it's interesting that people don't see that. It's like blinders when you're in the church. And I was the same way. I would go to church. I felt, okay, I'm rolling up in church on Sunday. I'm good. We're here. We're going to heaven, right?
Right.
I don't know what those people are doing. I mean, that's kind of the way it's taught, and that's exactly the opposite of what's supposed to be taught. That's exactly the opposite. You're supposed to be welcoming in people, creating a haven for people to come in, not a place for people to be excluded.
Right.
Because they don't dress properly. And, I know people are going to hear this and be like, they're putting the church down. I am not putting the church down. The church itself is a place of peace and community for a lot of people. And it does great work. But like anything else, like any other business, there's going to be some that are run by people it shouldn't be run by.
Absolutely, yes.
And those people are not any higher power in God's eyes than anybody else is. But that's what happens. The egos come into play in all basic religions, all types of spiritual practices that have been boxed in with rules.
Well, to piggyback on your positive notes about church, I do like some of the more contemporary style churches now. They are acknowledging that church is a business. We do have bills, we have employees, we have insurance, and yes, your money is going towards those things.
Yeah, so we're working together toward this. So, we need you to help.
I'm glad to see that growth, because I know when I was coming up, you didn't hear about that at all. You had the building fund that you always had your whole life, and there was never a purchase of a building.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, so I'm sure you've got hit with I think we had a conversation about someone saying out there, expressing their concern about you practicing witchcraft and how your relationship with.
Listen. Okay, first of all, anybody who says that, they really don't know what witchcraft is. If you want to look at the things that we do and the tools that we use, you may associate those with a pagan practice, which is where witchcraft is coming from. But to be honest with you, Christianity, the practices of Christianity and of the Catholic Church come from paganism. That's what they come from.
Right.
Voodoo and paganism, that's where they come from.
Right.
And we want to get real technical. Without going into super detail, these practices were stolen, and then they were flipped, whitewashed, and called something else. Does that sound familiar?
And then served.
And then you need to practice these, or you're going to hell.
Right.
But you who practiced them originally are witches, and we're going to burn you. So
right.
I am not a pagan. I am not a witch. I don't associate with any of those kind of things. I do know people who practice witchcraft. I do know people who practice paganism, Wiccans. Practices are based in the same kind of thing with those kind of tools. Some have deities, spirits. Some have saints that they talk to, orishas, whatever they want to call it. They all have some of those factors involved. But it's to say something's witchcraft is just a broad dismissal, saying it's not Christian, and that's what they're trying to say.
Right.
But you can believe in Jesus, and you can believe in God, and you can go to church, and you can still practice paganism or pagan things, and you can do those things. You can
Right.
use those tools. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. This is, like I said, people that quote the Bible on this, the Bible itself has stories about these practices.
Right.
Right? So you're not really reading what you're talking about when we do this. But it's witchcraft is just like a broad term. Magic is different.
Right.
Spells are different.
Right.
Than working with the earth and, doing blessings or whatever you're doing for yourself. It's not, or grounding yourself or working to connect with your ancestors. All of that stuff is not a negative thing, and it's not against Christians in any kind of way.
Right.
But it's a difficult conversation to have with people. I think that, of course, movies, horror movies, media in general make witches and supernatural things spooky and dark
Right,
arts.
right.
And, I'm doing tarot cards. And tarot cards aren't even the same thing. Tarot cards, real tarot readings, is really a divination tool. So you're like fortune telling almost. I don't want to say fortune telling, but you're reading a message from this layout of the cards. What you bring to it with your own intuition is on you. But that's not the same thing as the practices of voodoo and hoodoo and things that were African in nature.
Which is what, because for the sake of people that are listening and or watching, we throw those terms around a lot in religion: voodoo, witchcraft, hoodoo, and some people use those terms and they don't know what those things actually are.
Right. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not the expert on voodoo. I don't think that I practice those things, but I do know people that do. Hoodoo, the term hoodoo in general, and anybody who is out there listening to us that wants to write in and correct us or give us more detail, go for it.
Right.
I'm down. I'm always down
Absolutely,
to learn.
yes.
What I know of hoodoo is that hoodoo is African American in history and tradition. And it was created by enslaved people. So it was to connect spiritual practices, to connect to their roots, to their ancestors that they kept hidden from the masters, okay? But it's really like root work or conjure work. It's not a religion. So hoodoo is not a religion. Voodoo is a religion. Voodoo is from Haiti, if I'm correct. It does call upon different deities and spirits and saints, and just a lot of, actually one of my friends practices voodoo, and she was raised Catholic.
Wow.
She was like, the similarities are unbelievable in the fact that they have these saints that they worship, and they call them something else in voodoo, right? So I just think it's really interesting how similar they are and how people really are so against them.
Right.
And I'm like, this is where it came from. This is where you
Right.
got saints from.
It's weird to me. Like when you put them side by side,
Yeah.
like
You have to be, like, voodoo's a religion, you have to be ordained to practice it. So it's not, but you see all these movies where,
Christianity.
you see all these movies where people go down to New Orleans and they
Right, yeah.
start practicing voodoo and they become zombies and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not saying any of those things don't happen. I'm just saying that they make it a dark practice, and it really isn't.
Right.
It really isn't a dark practice. It's a different culture's practice. So Christianity itself, especially white Christianity, has really defined that and put it on the outside as something negative to be feared. It's a fear, is what it is.
Yeah. Well, when you put them side by side like that, the reality of the similarities, you can't really argue it, and I think that is something that we can address today.
Okay.
So we know that the general belief in a lot of these religions are, when they talk about paganism, they look down on it, they frown upon it, they say stay away from it, all of those kind of things, which to me is very ironic.
Ironic, yes.
It's really
Just a little
ironic.
bit, you think?
Considering
Here we go.
how much they mirror the religions mirror paganism with the practices and the teachings and the deities and things like that. It's funny. It's funny.
I don't think, and honestly, we say that, and a lot of times they don't even say pagan, they just say witchcraft.
Right, right.
And I know that the people who are practicing it, the parishioners, the congregation, they don't really know. A lot of people don't know that history. And that's a part of what you're talking about, asking questions.
Right.
So when you're not understanding, things aren't lining up to you. Because we have, back in the day, we didn't have the internet. We had what our parents told us, what the pastors told us, and that was law, We didn't have a way to question it.
Right.
So we have every ounce of information at our fingertips right now to research this stuff. And people still are in that box of fear. It's really fear-based. It's fear-based. And we say ironic because we know that much of Christianity, even Catholicism, or not, I don't want to say use it, but their practices are pagan in origin, or at least there's a similarity between them. That's where it came from. And, these things predate the Bible being written and stuff like that. So,
right.
We can run down a list. I mean, it does make me laugh when people say, Reiki is witchcraft. And I'm like, do you take communion? Well, yeah, we take communion. I know in the Methodist Church, it's the first Sunday of the month. It's communion
Most
Sunday.
churches is like that, right?
I know that because I didn't look it up. So you eat the body of Christ, and you drink the blood of Christ, and that doesn't sound a little witchy to you. Like, that's not a little bit witchy? Where do you think that comes from? So that's okay? I mean, I know you're not drinking blood, but it's a symbolic
right.
gesture, right?
Right.
But they don't think about that.
Right. And similarly, when they're talking about Reiki or other holistic practices where you have to use symbols or recognize symbols,
Right.
It's funny, we in the holistic community, it's frowned upon that we're using symbols, but you can see somebody draw the cross on themselves. I think that it's in church, at least I know, there are forms, and it's funny to me because after I became a Reiki master, I started noticing it more in church.
Right.
When prime example is when a guest pastor is about to preach, and whoever's introducing them, they tell you, stretch your right hand towards them. And it's the exact same thing. It's like you're sending energy to that speaker, but then having someone say, well, you're doing things with your hands. Like, well, you do too. And
someone told me that. They were like, I think the problem this was a Facebook friend of mine who I eventually had to block because it was like an interrogation. And I don't have to explain anything to anybody. That's the big point.
Right.
You don't have to explain your Christian belief to me. That's on you. But if you're asking me to reconcile what I do, and everything that we do is similar, and I have to keep telling you these things, you're not learning on your own. You're standing strong in your ignorance. And you want me to prove it to you, and I'm not doing that for you.
Right.
Do your own work. But that's one of the things they said was that you're taking the credit away from God, and I'm like, what? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. What you just said, you're stretching your hand out. Are you God? No, your intention. Is to send energy to this person, in God's name, in whoever's name you're sending it through. But you are a human being standing in this church with energy around you. And when you send the intention out, just like you put the intention up not to speak to somebody, it's the same intention. Not the same intention, but it is an intention, and it's energy.
Right.
And the same thing with churches laying on hands on people. We bring people up to the front who are suffering, and the whole congregation, or there'll be a circle of people that put their hands on them in prayer, and their intention is to heal them with God's energy, or whatever, however you want to say it. How is that different? How is that different?
Right.
Because no one in that building is God, right? We can all agree on that, right? No one in the building is God. So anything you're doing it on your own, claiming the intention from a different source. In Reiki, we don't even have to use our hands, but we can. And we're not the ones who are providing The
Right, right.
energy is already there.
Right.
We're kind of facilitating it the same way the congregation does, the
Right.
same way prayer circles do,
Right.
you know?
Right. Then they say, I know another favorite of mine is when they say, well, you guys do chanting, and they look at chanting as
Even prana, even breathing work, like prana in yoga, is considered demonic by some
Right,
Christians. So
right.
any kind of control, you're God's child, so I can't even breathe. I can't control my own breathing. That's demonic. You know,
Right. Right.
There's a lot of things people say.
So coming from that background, one of the things that I like to bring out when you talk about like using your own energy and taking, like you said, from a source, and however you practice, scripturally, if you're a Bible studier, you'll see that when Jesus in the Bible, when he was asked about the miracles and stuff that he did, he said that, I'm paraphrasing, of course, that you can do these things and more.
Absolutely. Right.
So if the deity that you're looking at as a source of power is telling you you can do these same things, it's I don't know, it's like, why don't you study that part? Like, why do you leave that part of it out? And then, like I said, with the chanting, when you have, they call it vain repetition. That's what it's called in church.
Okay.
Chanting is called, but
That's an interpretation. So you're picking up a book and going off of someone else's interpretation. If I sat and read it, I would probably get a whole different meaning from it than if someone was guiding me through it. Well, that's not what it meant. Well, how do you know that's not what it meant? And who wrote it? Because really, like I said, it was translated, right?
Right, right.
And a lot of the things we're talking about, a lot of the practices we're talking about predate Christ and Christianity.
Absolutely.
These are things, in tombs in Egypt, and these are sacred geometry alone. The symbols that are engraved in, there's no way we're not making this stuff up. This is historic stuff.
Right.
This is the dawn of time.
Right.
Which is the creation, right? So I just feel like if you look at so many things in the Christian holidays, the dates of things that happen in the Bible, and as a little girl growing up in the Methodist practice and watching TV back then when they had all the little shows, the Drummer Boy and all those kind of things, there was snowing. The little drummer boy was out in the snow playing a drum, and there's these camels and these people who are dressed for warm weather in this manger with this naked baby in the snow. And I was like, I didn't think about it when I was little, but then as I realized, okay, it's believed that the date, December 25th, is to line up with the winter solstice,
Right.
which is a pagan
Right.
observance, and that Jesus was not born in December. But a lot of things were lined up that way. If you look up Easter, if you look up
Sunday,
worshiping on Sunday, absolutely. All that stuff is not, it's not just something that's in Christianity. This came from somewhere.
Right.
And I think people are afraid to explore the origins of it. So when they see us, when I'm talking about us, not just you and me, just anybody who is having like a spiritual awakening, I'm going to say. And no matter where they are, they usually start by, they say, this doesn't align for me. It doesn't make sense to me. So I'm going to look deeper into it, right? And I'm going to look within, right? So I saw something online the other day. I'm going to make sure I get this right. It was a little meme one of my students had posted, and it said, religion is following the messenger. Spirituality is following the message. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. So you are a spiritual person. You can pick whatever organization you want to practice that spirituality in.
Right.
But a religion is following a leader of some kind, whether it's the Bible, person talking about the Bible, whether it's your pastor, your priest, whoever it is, it's their house, it's their rules, it's a business, it's politics, it's all of those things are going to come into that message. So the message is filtered, right? And it could be filtered because of an agenda, you know. Back in those times, it was we want women to be oppressed. We want black people to be oppressed. We want them to believe if they worship this way, they're going to go to heaven, while we are torturing and oppressing them, taking their own beliefs and using them against them, right? So I feel like when people talk about Jesus in the Bible, and you were saying, you know, he said we can do these things ourselves, right? Jesus would be the Reiki practitioner. Jesus was out with people who were sick, right?
Right.
He was walking,
Amongst the people.
and that's, you know, why he was persecuted, because he was out doing these things, right?
Right,
They don't
right,
like that.
right.
The higher ups don't like that. I am holding space for them to find their own way. And that's kind of what Christianity is supposed to do, right?
That is what it's supposed to do.
You're supposed to be guided to finding peace and living this lifestyle, right? So
Right.
there is a lot of common ground between, I feel like when we talk about Reiki not being a religion, there's no religious dogma attached to Reiki.
Right.
There's no God that you're worshiping. There's no rules around it like that. It's an energy. It's a spirituality. It's a spiritual practice.
Right.
But we end up explaining it like it's a religion, because some Reiki practitioners take their practice or their organizations and say, well, you have to do it this way, or you're not in my organization.
Right.
That's very church-like.
It
It-
is.
you know,
It's
so
very organized.
Any practice of spirituality, Reiki, whatever, it doesn't have to be Reiki, anything can be taken and put into a box with rules, any of them. So Reiki is not something that replaces your faith or your belief in God or whoever you believe in. It's a tool.
Right. And it's not even just Reiki, you know, like, because some people work with crystals, or some people work with
do.
meditation. and sometimes it's not even attached to something like Reiki. Like, you can work with crystals and not be a Reiki practitioner.
Right.
You know, and then again, religion looks at it like you shouldn't be doing that. And then specifically in the Bible, crystals are in the Bible. Meditation
Crystals are
is
everywhere.
in the Bible.
Crystals are everywhere. In tombs,
Right.
in Egypt, they're everywhere. They're in breastplates of warriors. They're everywhere.
Right. So one of the examples, I'm glad you said breastplate, because in one of the examples in the Bible, when it talks about Aaron and the jewels that he had on his breastplate, when you look into what was on it, they have carnelian is
like
on
a
there.
warrior stone.
They had jasper on there, you know, and just to be in a place where you're like, well, you shouldn't be doing that. Well, then in the Bible that you're reading, they used it.
They're wearing them.
And they're wearing it. And
Right.
there are the scriptures that tell you that these are the stones that you're supposed to have or should have. So it's weird to me when people look at, you know, me using or wearing crystals or
I mean, I could wear a big old cross made out of malachite or something. It doesn't, you know, I can have a crystal cross. It's
Right.
not a satanic thing. Has nothing to do with Satan at all.
so I mean even when you're talking about meditation,
What about rosary beads and malas? I mean,
Yeah.
these are tools of the church. These are tools of faith-based organizations.
right. I mean, I guess if they're not familiar with the work how they're used and the work that we're using them for, that's when their questions come in, and then they're like, well, I don't think you're supposed to be, you know, it becomes opinionated.
I don't mind answering people's questions. I don't feel like I'm responsible for their awakening or their non-awakening. That's on them, you know. And if someone asks you a question, I'm going to answer the question. But my answering the question is not going to clear things up for you. You're going to have to start looking at what you're doing. You know, if you
Absolutely.
have a problem with burning sage what's the dude's name that moved from? I
We're
don't,
not-
I
we're
don't
not
want to
gonna
say. I
call
don't
the
want to
name.
say his name, but I'm
We're
gonna tell you
not
right
gonna
now.
call
This
the
dude
name.
said that burning sage was Satanist or devil
Right.
worship.
Right.
This person is a philanderer, a liar, a cheater, but if you burn sage, you're going to hell. Come on now. So we're burning sage, incense, right? Crystals. We're laying hands on people. We're chanting. We are
Meditating.
We are drinking the blood of Christ and eating the body of Christ. And you look at the things that we're doing in our practices, and I will say that all of us bring our own practices, our own tools to whatever we do. So for me, I use crystals a lot. I know you use sound a lot. I use my intuition a lot. But there are people who just practice Reiki. You go up there, they do a Reiki session like in the book, and you go on home, and that's it. Some of us do readings. Some of us bring oracle cards or tarot into it. That's different depending on who you're dealing with.
Right.
So it doesn't always have to be using these tools. It doesn't have to be that type of practice. It just depends, just like any church. A different church can do something. So it's like
Right.
we always go back to comparing Reiki to churches. Reiki's not a religion, but let me explain this. Because it's a spiritual practice, just like worshiping God in a church is a spiritual practice. So you have that organized box around it.
It's so many different. We could talk about this for a couple of more
Absolutely.
hours. And, it's such a sensitive subject for a lot of people who do and are deeply rooted in religion.
Yeah.
And from speaking from experience, not only asking questions, but really opening up your mind to accepting the answers that you're finding and getting yourself in that mindset where if it's making sense, even though it goes against what I was taught, it's a barrier that you kind of have to break through.
Right.
And that's hard for a lot of people.
Well, people are blind faith. That's what they call blind faith. You're not asking questions. You're afraid. And if you're
Right.
afraid to do anything, you
Right.
need to question that.
Right.
You
And then
shouldn't be afraid.
it's one of the stories that I use that's in the Bible to kind of help people kind of ask questions when they talk about Moses and his whole story. But when he went to Egypt to study, to learn, my question was, well, if he went to Egypt to study and learn, clearly they were
already doing
they
it.
already knew. And if he went there to learn, the school systems, how they teach is
Everything.
already set up.
Right.
So to say that he walked away from that situation and then miraculously came up with identical things that he just learned,
Right.
and I need to throw that out there just so that people
No, it's
understand.
important.
For
You're
example,
not
like
questioning
they
it.
say that he got the 10 Commandments, but when you look at the 22 laws of Ma'at, they mirror the exact same thing. So
Right.
if he learned from the Egyptians, then why are you putting so much responsibility and trust and credit to the person that learned from someplace
Right.
else?
And it wasn't like you just got on a plane and flew to Egypt. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It was quite a journey. And it was, you're right. No one questions that. No one's going to stop and say, wait a minute, that doesn't, just that simple phrase. People don't think about that kind of
Right.
stuff.
Right.
Well, we've kind of touched on everything. But I think people should let us know if they have questions, if they have things we should address
I agree.
with this topic. Because this topic can go on forever and ever. We'll probably have different parts of this show. I know we're going to have to come back to this some way. But let's move on, if it's okay with you, to our segment, Keep Your Balance.
All right. So keeping your balance is one of my favorite topics because it's one of the things that I know we always get questions about, emails, messages, and what can I do?
Stay
So
grounded?
today we're going to talk a little bit about asking for help.
Oh, that's a big one.
With the way that society is set up, technology is set up, is you're got to be independent, do it yourself, DIY, that's right, yeah, DIY,
Yes.
do it yourself, yeah, DIY, to be independent and things like that. But a lot of times, you do, as humans, we need community, and it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to pull from your different resources, and it takes strength to be able to ask. So, when you're asking, that creates it creates balance for you. It keeps you grounded with understanding who you are as a person, being human, and it also puts you in a situation where it shows your inner strength for asking when we're in an environment where being independent is always being thrown at you. So asking for help, finding out who knows the different areas that you need help in. Asking for help is a way that you can.
I think a lot of people are afraid to ask for help, or they just don't want to bother people. I know that's one of my things. But the other thing about that is that it makes you realize you're not alone.
Right.
So it's not
exactly
so isolating. So whatever you're going through, if you ask for whatever help it is, you realize there's other people that are dealing with it that'll step up.
Right.
And then you feel more grounded because, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy.
Right. And then when you go through that sense, even physically, it puts you in a place where it relieves your blood pressure and it helps you relax and things like that. But that's something else I could go on and on about. So in closing, let me say thank you guys so much for joining us with this episode of Mixed Vibes. For more information on the Healing Flame Collective and this episode, please visit www.thehealingflamecollective.com and make sure that you subscribe to this channel. Thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Mixed Vibes. If you liked this episode, remember to subscribe to our channel. You can find us on social media at The Healing Flame Collective, and you can email us at thehealingflamecollective@gmail.com with your topic ideas. See you next time.